Welcome to another episode of the Two World Podcast. Today we have a very interesting topic. We'll be exploring Barney's journey to Japan. We've touched on this topic in the past, but today we're going to be taking a deeper dive into how he got there and to some of the aspects of the story that we weren't able to reflect on before. And as always, I'm one of the co-hosts, Jacob, and I have with me today...
I am Barney.
Excellent. So just to get things started, could you give us just a brief recap of when you had the idea of going to Japan and some of the background information about how you first started that journey?
I think that maybe the first inkling of Japan probably came to my life at Goshen College when my friends and we really liked watching the special kind of anime, the Japanese style animation. And there was one called Rurouni Kenshin. It's actually about so Rurouni means like a samurai who doesn't belong to a clan or a feudal lord anymore. And so they are kind of masterless. And the interesting thing about this manga, this comic kind of comic book, which thinking of comics in America, the stories are so much different from the way that they write the Japanese version. Maybe there's much more serialized, and maybe the stories, I don't know if they're more in depth or whatnot, but the volumes are much longer, for one. And this one takes place in history. It's not a historical character, but they place him in history, and there are actual historical figures that he interacts with. And being a history major, I really enjoyed that. And the scenery and the different traditions and cultures that they talk about were interesting. And he is, even though he was a samurai and had kind of a difficult past, fighting wars and whatnot, he chose a life of pacifism. And in the story, he reverses the blade on his sword, so it can only maybe harm or wound. It can't kill, and can't draw blood. Can't actually, can just like blunt. It's blunt the way it is. And I thought that was an interesting and maybe unexpected story coming out of Japan that I hadn't anticipated. And then that just kind of stuck with me. And then, of course, when I was in Thailand, I guess it's been 26, 27 episodes ago, and when we talked about Thailand, and I can't remember how much I mentioned then, but working with the NGO that I worked with, there was another NGO in Japan, or in Thailand, run by two Japanese women that we interacted with maybe on a monthly basis, because their premise, or maybe their goal, or their reason for operating, was to help Thai women who went to Japan to work there, in bars or whatnot, and ended up getting HIV and or AIDS, and had to leave the country and come back to Japan. So kind of a hospice for women who had spent time in Japan but were Thai and then came back to Thailand. And interacting with these two older women, I kind of rekindled my fondness for Japan, my interest in Japan. And it was so wonderful to hear their stories, and sometimes they shared the food that they had with them. And and then I kept running into people with some connection to Japan, and I met some people who were teaching English. They're from America, but they're teaching English in Japan, and they happened to be visiting in Thailand. And then later, I remember thinking, while I was in Thailand, I had the chance to uh, visit another MCC worker in Hong Kong. And I thought, if Hong Kong is this great, just the idea came to me, then Japan must be just this wonderful, amazing place. And that thought and these interactions with people along the way, plus of course, having met the woman who would eventually become my wife so soon into the beginning of my time in Thailand, was just more and more and more motivation for me to find some way that I could get to Japan.
Oh, it's really interesting how there were different aspects to what drew you, cultural things that were in media and um, comics and movies, but then also the relationships you made in Thailand, and this bigger picture started to emerge of what Japan could be like. I'm kind of wondering, what was the trajectory or the path that you walked to set everything up to get there? After once you realize, oh, I have a desire, I'm intrigued, I'm drawn, I really want to go. What did you do next?
Yeah, I believe that I was able to stay in touch with the English teachers somehow. And even so, after my time at MCC, I started looking for ways to teach in Asia, I guess, and I saw some openings in Korea and maybe Japan, I think, and not really Taiwan. Maybe not really having a good sense of the geography. I thought, oh well, maybe Korea isn't so far, and it wouldn't be too hard to get to Japan from there. And I mean, in reality, it wouldn't be, but of course, it's easier to live in Japan. But the things I saw for Japan, looking for teachers, it seemed pretty complicated. You know, you should have this much experience. You need to, before you come to the interview, you need to submit like this kind of lesson plan. And I had, just graduated from college and had just spent a year volunteering, and I didn't know the first thing about writing a lesson plan, and had a few interviews actually with some schools in Korea, and one of them hoped that I could come quickly, but it turned out that I had enough validity left in my passport, but I was out of passport pages.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Wow. Oh, I'm
So,
interesting.
I know. So being in Thailand, um, this was one of those things I didn't know. Again, I didn't know the first thing about traveling, and I had a visa to stay in Thailand. I didn't know that I needed to have like a re-entry permit in order to keep my visa. And so when when I went to visit the other MCC person in Hong Kong, when I came back, they canceled my visa. And
Oh,
um,
wow.
so then every 3 months I had to leave and come back. And I visited some MCC people in India. I went to Burma just across the border and then come right back. And maybe one other trip along the way. And all of this ended up, because sometimes the visa is one whole page, and
Oh,
it
I
takes up
see.
one page of your passport. It's like a big stamp, a big sticker. And I didn't have the double sized passport, and I was out of pages. And I told the people that, yeah, it sounds interesting, and I'm excited, but my I don't have my passport right now. It's getting more pages added. And then they said, well, we can wait so long. And then they got back with me and they said, so, if you want to come, then that's fine. But you should be prepared to have, this many thousands of dollars with you just to get started. And again, being so young, that kind of really hit me. Like, I never had that much money before. And how can I get this much money? And then I said, I'm just sorry, I don't know how I can make it work. And then they sounded disappointed, and were sorry that it didn't work out. And um, I guess along the way, then somehow the thought of reconnecting with the English teachers in Japan came back to me, and it worked. And the reason why it worked was because of Worcester Mennonite Church. Because again, in order to get started, I needed so much money to help me get started. Was my idea, but actually, the church group that was established in Japan were really welcoming and really had almost everything set up for me beforehand. But even so, the members of Worcester Mennonite were so very supportive of the idea of me going, as the program was teaching English, but also talking about the Bible. So the English classes would be an hour long, or 90 minutes long, and an hour of lesson, and then 90 minutes of talking about the Bible in English. And that really felt like the right way to do it. And the people at Worcester Mennonite really got behind that as well, and helped me to get to Japan.
That is so fascinating. I have never heard this part of the story. So, did you reach out to Pastor Ralph at the time, or how did the congregation become aware of this opportunity for you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that maybe there was a little bit of precedence. I think a few members of few youth around my age at Worcester Mennonite kind of had a little precedence where they stood up and said, "I'm interested in this opportunity, and if anyone is moved to support me in this way, then of course I'm welcoming the support. I'm looking for support." And I think that I stood up and, maybe during prayers and concerns, and announced that I'm hoping to have this opportunity. And yeah, a number of people helped in a number of different ways. And I think I remember, of course, Pete Johnson came to me right away because he has such an interest in Japan as well, and was just, more than anything, just emotionally supportive and encouraging about that idea. And that helped to kind of allay any kind of anxieties and fears, just hearing other people being excited about this chance to really kind of help me to think that maybe I'm on the right track.
Wow, that's so interesting. Well, thank you for sharing that. So, you got established teaching English and talking about the Bible, and you had some support from the US, from Worcester Mennonite Church, and you had a supportive community locally there in Japan. It sounds like a church community that had welcomed you. Was this in Narita, or where was this in Japan?
Yeah, this was actually even west of Tokyo. So in the prefecture west of Tokyo, Kanagawa, and it was in Kawasaki City. And so then Ayako is in Narita still, so maybe more than 2 hours away by train.
Wow.
But it was a start, and of course, we could meet in Tokyo and whatnot. But it was still tricky for me to get a handle on things, as even though I went to, I went to Worcester Mennonite since I was little, and I went to Goshen College, and I didn't have the firmest footing when it came to talking about the Bible, and also being a little bit maybe shy and introverted in general. It's also hard for me to formulate a way to make it interesting and have the people feel like they're still getting their value from these lessons. Thankfully, they knew ahead of time that this is part of the lesson plan. And our church had the approach that people would rather pay at least a little money and take these English lessons, and then stay for hearing about the Bible, as opposed to the other approach the Mormon Church have in Japan, is their English lessons are completely for free. And then they also do something similar, talking about the Bible and the Mormon faith in that way. And the pastor at the church, he sensed that maybe people are a little hesitant if it's free. it makes them wonder kind of what's the catch.
Mm.
But at the same time, they're paying, it's very cheap compared to other English schools. They are paying, and so they do kind of expect to learn something, since, to
Right.
get something back for their investment.
So, if I may ask some clarifying questions, then the lessons that you were teaching, were they provided at a church or through a church? Ah, okay, okay. Did the church have a school connected with it, or did they? Is this something they offered that they advertised and people could come to the church building?
Right. Yeah. The
Ah,
classes were at the church building or at the church kind of annex office.
okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
And it was, yeah, all ages and all levels. And they, they actually kind of had, in a way, a sister church of the two pastor. The pastor that was running the church was from America originally, but he grew up in Brazil actually, and then he moved to Japan. And then a Japanese pastor. They were very, very close, and they really supported each other. And so I actually went to the other church sometime too to teach kids.
Mm,
Uh, I think for 2 days a week.
okay. What was it connected with a certain denomination? Do you know?
It's just I'm not sure specifically, but it was Anabaptist.
Anabaptist. Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So you're teaching English, and then on the side, you're trying to visit Ayako, who's 2 hours
Mm-hmm.
away, probably
Mm-hmm.
every chance you can.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're also probably trying to learn Japanese better, right? And get a better
Right.
command of the language. And I
Right.
remember at one point you told me that Ayako really helped you in that when she would communicate with you, she wouldn't simplify things for you. She would give you a complex, normal level message sent to you, and you would have to work hard to decipher, the particulars. And so, can you talk a little bit about that journey of learning the language? Like, what were some of the key factors that helped you um, make progress? And
Yeah. Yeah. I think probably there are probably three elements that come to mind. One, there had, as I said, there had been other English teachers before me who would be there about a year or 6 months or so, and they had left books behind. And some of they were probably just the right level for me to get going with. And I didn't know it at the time. Someone had left a stack of karuta cards. So I just found these cards with these pictures on them, and then like a little hiragana characters, so kind of like the Japanese alphabet, in the corner. And it's just a mystery to me what these mean. I'm thinking probably all of these pictures start with this letter. And then I'm thinking they must be flashcards, but I look on the back and there's no explanation. Because I thought surely there must be like a list of all the things on here that start with hiragana or with this character. Then at least I can look them up in the dictionary. But there's nothing like that because it's meant to be played by Japanese kids and Japanese adults as a game. And it's actually only I showed these to Ayako once. I said, "What are these? Do you know what these are?" And I took a few with me, and she said, "Yeah, this is part of the game, but there's supposed to be another half. There's supposed to be like a whole like poem that's written
mm,
on one card, and like kind of the referee or the person running the game reads the poem, and then the contestants are supposed to hear for which hiragana character is getting mentioned and try to slap that one first, and then they
oh,
get the card. And so that helped me to get a good hang on what the hiragana look like, the characters. And as part of the program as well, the church program, I visited the English clubs of two different universities, and that was very nice to be able to interact with people who were very, very close to my age at that time, and they really wanted to learn English, and they were happy, of course, to teach me little Japanese things here and there, especially I confided with one or two of the guys, I've got this girl that I like, and she's cute and this and that. And they said, "Oh, let me teach you these, phrases that you can use, that you can say." And yeah, that was the other one. And of course, yeah, I mean, more than anything, um, Ayako, she said, when I tell her, she said, "Oh, she said, I was just lazy. I didn't, it's so hard to write everything out with just hiragana. So I just wrote it normally." And this was way before smartphones. So I would have to like take my little phone and copy and things, and then load up this little, I want to say keitai, like cell phone version of a Japanese English dictionary, and paste it in there and find out what it means. And then sometimes I say, did you say this? Is that what that means? And then, oh, yes, or oh, no, a little different. And,
Wow.
but yeah, seeing that for sure, the kanjis and everything as they are, and being so motivated, I really retained, and I'm a visual learner anyway, so I really retained that quickly. I think that of most of the people I know, I might be one of the better readers, and I think that's
Ah.
thanks to that. And
Can you
yeah,
talk a little bit about? Oh, I'm sorry. Didn't mean to interrupt.
I no, I was just going to say that yeah, the I can even remember using the textbooks that were left behind. Like one of them was about how to buy a stamp, and I kind of read the scenario. Person A says this, and person B, and I kind of okay. I go to the I go to the post office. I say this, and then I had one with me, and I was trying to find my way on campus. Where is the tatemono? Where is the English building? And then, oh, it's just this way. And I thought, wow, I can really do this just a few months, into my time there.
Wow. Oh, that's so interesting. I'm curious, in your times with Ayako, when you would get together, do you know when the transition happened where you went from speaking primarily in English to speaking primarily in Japanese? Or was it always a mixture, or at least initially, until
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm just curious
Yeah.
or how that works or works still.
Yeah. I think that at the beginning, she studied Chinese in university, Mandarin. But she had taken, her mom had wanted her to take English classes from junior high school, maybe even a little in elementary school. And I think probably English is required, at least a little bit, junior high and high school, and then maybe a few semesters in college. And so she actually spoke fairly well. And so then at first, of course, we would just communicate in English. And sometimes I would ask her, um, yeah, after she would explain something, I would say, how would that sound in Japanese? And then she would explain it the same way in Japanese. And I think, yeah, just eventually I got better and better at it. And sometimes I'd study hard and sometimes not. And of course, probably I was only with that church for 6 months. And I think I will have to talk about how I got to the kindergarten job, because that's a very good story too. And then, of
Yes.
course, working with kids really helped a lot.
Mm,
And then probably from then is when I would try to speak more and more in Japanese with her.
okay. Ah, I see. Um, do you, is it something that was very seamless and organic, or did she notice at one time you showing up? Oh, you're speaking to me primarily in Japanese now. Like, was it ever something that you both were aware of, or did it just organically kind of happen?
Yeah, I think probably I think it just slowly, probably the percentage scale kept shifting, toward Japanese. Um, and I remember talking with my boss and a coworker from Canada, and we were just chatting after work, and the boss said to us, she said, how is it that you guys, like your thought process or the how your cognitive process when you're speaking Japanese? And she said, and my coworker, he said, yeah, I have to think about. He had actually been. I think we figured it out. He arrived in Japan the same day I did, um, at the exact same day of the same year, and so he said, yeah, I kind of have to think of what I want to say in English first, and then think about how to say that in Japanese, and then she said, "Oh yeah, that's the way I am too. The other way, 'cause, I mean, she's native Japanese." Um, and I thought to myself, "Oh, actually, it kind of just comes to me." So I noticed that probably then that I really am able, probably hearing enough phrases and um, like certain and grammar points used in the same way over and over. So you start to certain things just really stick, and you know that after A will come B, and it just keeps coming to you so much that I realize that yeah, I don't have to really think of what I want to say first. It just starts coming um, that way, and of course when Ayako and I, before our kids were born, when we were living together, then when we were married and living together, then and we would basically speak Japanese together all the time. And then, but then with when Yuma and Silas came around, then I only speak English at home now.
Well, thanks for explaining that. I find it fascinating the change that happens within a student as they're learning a language. Maybe they reach a certain point where they have a dream in that language, and they're like,
Oh
"Oh,
yeah.
this is I'm starting to dream in that language." Or there's certain places along the way where there are these, I don't know if you call them milestones, or they
Mm,
signify that there's a deeper understanding and mastery or familiarity with the language.
hmm
And I just was thinking, oh, how interesting in your relationship, having started in English and then had this growth, your capacity kept increasing with Japanese. I just kind of wondered
hmm
what that was like. And it sounds really interesting. I'm kind of curious. I do want to transition to your story from the church to teaching children in school, but I did want to ask just one more question.
hmm
Did you notice a difference in Ayako's communication style from comparing when she's communicating in English to Japanese? I mean, maybe I know what's probably so slow and organic that the change happened over time. It was hard to maybe make a comparison, but I didn't know if you'd ever, if, like you said, if you're thinking logically in a certain language, sometimes certain style might emerge that might be slightly different than,
hmm
I'm just
hmm
wondering if that's the case.
Yeah, one probably the one thing that the one memory that came to me just now is I think maybe we talked about this before, how, or maybe just you and I have talked about it personally, how uh, um, in the case of like little kids, you usually add kun or at the end of boys' names and chan at the end of girls' names, or if someone is cute, if it's boy or girl, you can still add chan. And I think maybe it was when Ayako started to call me Barney Chan that maybe that was maybe when kind of one of these notice differences that I noticed in the way that she communicated when we were speaking in Japanese. Um, and one thing about Japanese though is I'm gonna get this wrong. I think it is. I'm gonna get this backwards. And I shouldn't, and my professors are going to be embarrassed, but I think it's a high context language where so much of it is unspoken. So um, you rarely have to use the subject when you're talking, and everyone knows what you're talking about. Or you can even leave out the direct object and people know what you're talking about. And you can leave out most of the sentence and everyone knows what you're talking about. Um, one time, Ayako sent a note to her sister, are you done at the dentist now? and her sister responded with one hiragana. And they know what they're talking about. So,
Wow.
um, and yeah, so that is one thing that I still struggle with, but it's good that she communicates with me just as she would with everyone else,
Mm.
um, and doesn't feel like she has to make sure that she uses the subject, make sure that she uses the direct object, and of course, English, especially American English, is the opposite. It's low context where we have to explain everything. We have to have the subject, have to have the direct object. Otherwise, it's just too vague, and that uh, ambiguity makes people uncomfortable. But in Japanese, people don't mind that ambiguity, or they are just going with it. They know what it means.
That makes me
And
wonder, is there ever a time when you would prefer to have a certain type of conversation in English versus Japanese with Ayako based on the nature of what I mean? Sometimes maybe the ambiguity is fine for certain topics, but other ones, maybe the specificity is helpful. I'm just wondering.
yeah, that's really true. Especially when she wants me to do something, um, then I really need as many details as possible because I don't want to get it wrong. So
Sure.
yeah,
Interesting.
and then sometimes we still, even though I speak English at home, we still when we're texting we still write in Japanese, and
Ah,
it's much faster. And sometimes I do have to double check with her, is this what you meant? Or sometimes I'll do kind of like the if you're talking with someone, over the phone with customer service, and I just summarize everything that I'm supposed to do just to make sure, is that what you meant? Is that what you want me to do? And then just to be extra, extra clear. And
ah.
probably that's not necessary for some people, but for maybe Japanese to Japanese communication. But in my case, I really need it.
Okay. So when you're with Yuma um, and when you're with Silas, you're speaking to them in English and
Hmm.
playing with them in English, helping them develop those skills.
Hmm.
When you're at home and the kids are in bed and you and Aiko are having a conversation, are you still using English most of the time for that? Or if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah. Then I think I usually slip back into Japanese.
Ah, okay. Okay.
Hmm.
Oh, so
Hmm.
that's so interesting. Wow. Well, thank
Hmm.
you for sharing that, like
Hmm.
pulling back a little bit of the curtain to
Hmm.
help,
Yeah.
us in the audience to understand like what it could look like to go to another country to learn the language and then to start a family and how that
Hmm.
journey overlaps with that. Would you share a little bit about your transition from the church to the teaching in the school with the children?
Yeah. 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 This story, I just love this story so much. And it's perfect for this podcast, and it really reassured me um about my path coming here to Japan. So before coming to Japan, I was working at Applebee's, and I met some friends there and some people who might I would want to meet again. I thought, and I told them, oh, I'll just be there, 6 months or maybe a year. I just don't know. And a lot of it was I was thinking was kind of hinging on how things go with Ayako, because I was we met in Thailand, and I was hoping to meet her again and see how it went. But also it was about support and financially. And thankfully, the church was letting me have like my own lessons, or they would arrange lessons for me and then just give me that lesson fee to use to live off of, and I didn't have to pay rent, thankfully. And with the church, then um, every Friday morning, we would have a prayer breakfast together, and we would just have fellowship, and then after that we would pray, and talk about any prayer requests, and then sometimes pray with partners, and sometimes pray as a whole, and sometimes pray as we felt moved. And it was getting to I started in September, and it was getting to January or so, or February, and one of the other people who go to the church and would come to the prayer breakfast, but they were teaching. They would teach a few classes, kind of volunteering with the church, and then they were working full time teaching. And the husband said, he's checking the newspaper for job openings and applying for things that are coming up as the school year is going to start soon. I thought, well, I'm really enjoying living here in Japan. I'd like to stay longer, and things are going well. So that's a good idea. And I went to the library and found this ad for, the place where I work now. And it was, the salary was much, much higher than the other places. And just everything that the benefits and everything was just so much better. And I thought to myself, but why am I qualified for this? I don't know. This is definitely for someone else who really has a lot more experience. And I mentioned it to Ayako, and she said, why don't you just go ahead and apply? And I said, well, yeah, all right. And called and tried to fax my resume, and they said that it didn't come. And then I sent the email, and it arrived, and they said, yeah, can you come for an interview? And it worked out that I was at that other kind of sister church that day, and it's much closer than where I had been. And went to the interview, and the guy who was interviewing me, he's from Canada, and he was also a Christian. And he said, yeah, I mean, the resume looks great at Goshen College, and you were volunteering with a Christian organization in Thailand, and we really, really want you to join us here, but your schedule looks like it's just so busy. And because I listed the classes I was teaching presently at that time, and I said, well, I can leave here. It worked out that the pastor's two nieces were in to start teaching as well. And I said, they just have two replacements here who they can easily take my classes over. And, oh, okay, well, we'll let you know. And then he said, we decided to go with someone else who, they can start right away and this and this. And, but he said, I'll let you know if I ever hear anything at other schools. And then I said, oh, okay. Yeah, okay, I understand. And then it was a week later on the Friday prayer breakfast. And I always put my phone on manner mode, on silent mode, every time, without exception. I always have that phone on manner mode, especially during prayer time. And I was just praying, dear Lord, please let there be a way for me to stay in Japan. And then not too many seconds later, the phone rings, not in silent mode at all. And I excused myself and took the call, and he said it was that guy from this school, and he said the person that we hired was 45 minutes late, and he said this was just the excuse we were hoping for, so we fired him, and if you can come today, then you can you're hired. And I didn't have any classes on Friday, so I said, yes, I absolutely can come today. And it just worked out perfectly.
Wow.
And I moved out there and started teaching there, and was much, much, much closer, 20-minute train ride instead of 2-hour train ride from Narita. And yeah, it was just one of those things.
And this is the school in Yachio, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Okay. And is that around the time when you made the transition to teaching at Yachio that you got connected with Yachio Bible Baptist Church, or was that a little later?
Yeah. I can't remember if I told this story yet either, but I think I did. Right when I was commuting, and I kept noticing the placard, the advertisement for one of the churches nearby.
Oh,
And I think maybe it was 6 months or so when I got settled in, and then I thought, I would like to find a church, and then thankfully just searching on after that church didn't quite work so well with me than just searching on Google for churches. I found that Yachio Church, and that started
Nice.
from 11 a.m. instead of 10:30, and that fit just right for me. And I'm
Nice.
very glad. Yeah.
Oh, yes, for sure. And the actual accommodations at this point, was it just an apartment there in Yachio where you were staying?
Hmm.
Ah, okay.
Yeah. I actually, I moved all of my things by train. I,
Wow.
I packed everything that I could into this big mountaineering backpack and whatever else I had. And sadly, no one was helping me. I was really hoping someone would help me because it was
Oh,
so much to carry. And I had like maybe 4 transfers.
oh
And
man.
I was so tired. And I even they arranged for me to stay at a hotel that one night, and then the next day they would help me find a place to stay. And I knew it was just not far from the station, but I was so tired. I actually took a taxi, and I felt bad because the taxi driver was annoyed because he's only get the minimum fare for taking me down the street, and then he has to line up again in the
Oh,
line of taxi drivers. And I was sorry, but I just couldn't lug those things another step.
oh, sure. Oh, that's interesting thinking about um doing a move when you have to physically transport everything. There's no moving truck. There was, I mean, the amount of things you had at that time just was at a point where you needed to use bags and
Mm-hmm.
the
Mm-hmm.
trains. And, but, um, well, that sounds really challenging. And if you had been here in the States, you could have called your family maybe, and,
Oh
or
yeah.
a friend that you had, a neighbor, but you didn't have quite this same support network at that time, probably.
Mm-hmm.
So, would you talk a little bit about um, the challenges as you were getting acclimated to life in Japan? Like
Mm-hmm.
that's one example of a challenge where
Mm-hmm.
you don't have
Mm-hmm.
that as big of a support network for things
Mm-hmm.
like that. What are
Mm-hmm.
some of the things that you encountered as you were getting used to living there, navigating a different culture,
Mm-hmm.
learning to find your own place and things and your niche? What were some of the things you encountered in the way of difficulties?
Yeah. Um, thankfully, yeah, thanks to my mom and my parents, I was able. I had cooking skills. I felt that I could get by with, but um, the things in the supermarket are very different, and it's hard to know how to cook things. So I had never sorry, I was lucky to arrive in the fall because they say that all of the best fruits and vegetables and whatnot are start to come into season in the fall. And I remember seeing in these orange all of these orange fruits lined up in the supermarket. And in Thailand, I learned that you should never turn down. It's just my own personal philosophy. You should never turn down the chance to eat something new because you might not have that chance again. And it might be one of those great things. I personally really like bee larvae thanks to that in experience in Japan, and bamboo worms fried. If you had some of those for me right now, I'd eat them up, even though I just brushed my teeth. But if I hadn't had that outlook, I would have been hesitant to try those. But so here's this fruit, and I've never seen it before, and I just bought one, and when I got back to the I was staying at the church at this time. This was very early, and I just took a bite, and as it was, and its taste was interesting, but not my favorite. And it turned out I didn't find out until much later it was a persimmon that I had eaten.
Ah, okay.
Yeah,
Interesting.
and I probably bought one that was a little bit overripe, maybe
Oh,
compared to the ones that they usually serve. And also you're supposed to peel
oh,
them. But yeah, I think that was a challenge. But thankfully at the church, then there were enough. I was staying at that annex, and there were enough people in and out that they would help me. I didn't know how to use the rice maker, and they said, "Oh yeah, we'll show you. You've got to wash the rice first, though." They said, and okay, and then add the water up to here, okay. And there was I forgot to mention this person as a big help for learning Japanese. There was a girl from that university one of the universities that I taught at in the English club, or helped at in the English club, and she would come to church, and she would loved cooking too, and she helped me learn how to cook really simple things that are easy for a person living on their own. And then we would hang out. Her house was much closer than Narita. We became friends, and we would hang out, and she would just teach me Japanese here and there. And yeah, so finding support in that way was such a big thing. And as strange as this probably sounds, teaching and living at a church and going to that church, I actually at times felt more peace and more of a bit of a connectedness when I was at that other church where the kids were. Not far from there, there was a very big temple, and I would go to the temple where it's in the middle of nature. I think probably that's what I was having trouble with growing up in Ohio, in a small town, and then going to the metropolitan Tokyo area, and not really having any of that. And we talked about sharing some photos. They're a little bit small, but I can just share.
Yes, please.
3 that I took. This was with my really small phone. So, you'll probably, maybe everyone will feel a little bit of a flashback to, technology past, more than almost 18 years ago. But these are photos that I took from the temple, and maybe you will feel too that it's a nice quiet place that you can go. So it's in the fall, and I saw these Japanese maples, and you can see how the ones that are in the sunlight are turning color. And in this area of Japan, we really didn't get a lot of fall leaves, and so that was another thing that probably drew me to this at this time. And
it's beautiful. Beautiful.
Yeah,
I can see why that really spoke to you. It was very meaningful to be in that place and see that, give you a sense of connectedness with nature. And
yeah. And sorry, something that I cooked.
It looks nice too.
Yeah, thank you. Salmon cream pasta with avocado. and also at the temple here, the same leaves on the ground. And it was just such a nice place to find for me that I think that even though it was a temple, it was nature, and that could really help me find a real sense of peace and calm. And then I liked the juxtaposition between the city around and then the nature here, and then also within the temple, there were areas. So I took this photo of a flowering shrub, and they were shedding their flowers, and then I kind of liked this transition, or this contrast with the color and the dirt that was around. And I always, in a way, I sometimes felt a little bit shy, and I didn't really talk about it with the pastor, either of the pastors that I would go there. I was a little uncertain of what they would think, but for me, it was really something that helped me every week to be able to go there and get some focus. And I think, that may have been, even though I had spent time in Hong Kong and Bangkok, and Chiang Mai was a big city too, probably it was just, taking the train and being with all of these other people on the train, and Everywhere you go, there's all these other people, and it's a lot of concrete. And um, being able to find this little haven of nature that could help me to feel a little bit more like home. I think that was really what helped me through the hard. That was probably the hardest uh, part of adapting to living in Japan.
Mm. Thank you for sharing that. That's interesting. I wouldn't have thought of it in that way, but as you kind of explain that, being from a rural environment and just not having as much nature around you, how that would make you feel disconnected and longing for some solitude. And wow, that's fascinating. And I also want to ask you, as you were living there and you were having these experiences and you found this park, what were the surprises or the things that you weren't anticipating that emerged? That wow, I thought this might be different than it has ended up being. And um, was there a sense as you were living there, like that it was better than you had hoped, or was there a sense that was just far different than what you were thinking it would be like? Kind of wondering about
Mm-hmm.
that aspect
Mm-hmm.
of your journey.
Yeah, I think actually that even though I just said what I said just now, I had the image that probably Japan was even more metropolitan than what ended up being. Like, I don't know why I had the image that like all of Japan was just this one big city, and busy, busy, busy with all these neon lights and everything, and parts of it are, but there are also places like that temple in Tokyo, and the Meiji Jingu Shrine, this really big area that is almost in the woods that's in downtown Tokyo. Um, and so I know a lot of people mention how Japan does a good job of kind of holding on to the past and embracing and uh, making that a part of the future and the changes that they make. And you notice things like that. And I think that gives it such a unique feel. And that was such an interesting and a nice surprise for me to realize too. And seeing all the different types of people around Japan, I think seeing the different groups, and then eventually understanding and like kind of the subcultures that as much as everyone feels like they in Japan, like they went to kind of be on the same level. We kind of talked about this a little bit with Kai when we were talking about Kai. Kind of everyone kind of achieving at the same rate in school and kind of following the same way in school and whatnot. But then outside of school, you see people, kind of finding their own little means of independence and self-expression in different subculture groups that you see around the area. It was something that was new for me to see and experience, and also something to appreciate about Japan. And the other huge thing was finding that I liked to work with kids. I went to at Goshen. I thought about being a high school history teacher, and I wasn't sure if that was for me. And I mean, I didn't have, especially as the youngest in a family of four, I didn't have any real contact with being with kids, playing with kids, not really knowing how to appreciate spending time with kids. And the one pastor's wife at the other church where I taught kids, she said, "Wow, you're really good with the kids." But even more than that, she said, when she would tell the children's story, kind of the Bible story, and she would have me act out certain parts, she said, "You're also very good at communicating through acting and through your actions in that way."
Mm.
And I hadn't thought that was so. I didn't never occurred to me. And then uh, working at the kindergarten then, and all of these different age levels from as young as 2, and then up to 6th grade, 12 or 13. I found all of these different things to really love about working with kids. And even if the thought came into my mind, well, maybe this is my last year. And then I kept thinking, well, I'd like to see, this or that kid graduate from kindergarten. It's 3 years of kindergarten, and then inevitably the next year, I just would like to stay at least until this child graduates or until this one graduates. And yeah, and then of course being back there, I'm so thankful again. Even today, 2 girls came by after their I think it was after their junior high school graduation, and I walked down the steps and they said, "Oh, it's Barney Sensei. You came back." And I said, "Yeah, of course I came back. Um, I wish you were still 6 years old so I knew what you looked like and who you are, because you changed so much. I don't really know who you are right now, but thank you for remembering me." And that kind of affirmed that, maybe after all these years, they still remember me, that maybe I did a good job. Maybe I was okay at teaching kids too. And it certainly was fun and rewarding for me. And I'd never expected that. I thought I would be awful at it. And that was just another huge blessing and affirmation that I had in my life.
Oh, I love that, that you discovered a completely new area of meaningful uh, aspect that you could serve with your talents and gifts, and it's become a big part of your focus in life now, and that's wonderful. uh, I keep thinking, as you're there, you get deeper understanding. You can see both the beauty and the challenges of what another culture has to offer. It probably makes you aware too of the beauty and the challenges of your home culture. And I kind of wonder, about identity. It's the longer you live in Japan, do you feel like you're between worlds, so to speak? And you come back to the US, you probably see things here that you're not so excited about, or there are probably things that you love, that are familiar, but maybe you have new eyes now, that you've lived in another culture so long, that help you see, oh, maybe the Japanese way is better in that particular respect. Or when you go back to Japan, maybe the US way is better in that respect from your vantage point. I don't know.
Yeah.
I guess I just, maybe as I'm thinking of drawing this part of your story to a close for our audience, like, what are some things you've learned about living in that tension between your experience in the US, your experience in Japan? Is there a theme or a big picture thing that you've noticed? Or is it true that you appreciate some things more about one than the other, or, that type of thing? I would love to hear before we would draw things to a close.
Yeah. That I think that really is true, that maybe you get a sense of what each culture values. And yeah, you kind of see some things that maybe one culture values that maybe isn't so highly stressed in the other. And you see something that, like, maybe both cultures appreciate, but they express them a different way. One idea that came to mind was sports. In Japan, people love baseball, and you go to a game and you see them. Some of the fans, they all dress the same, and they have a different song that they sing for each batter, and or they jump up and down the entire game, right, and sing these songs and the way that they cheer. And it's just so different from the way that they do it in America. But America still has that intensity in the way that people cheer too. And then there's, of course, I appreciate, even though I can understand Japanese just as well, the announcing is different. America, they tell, especially during baseball, they tell a story and they tell all these interesting things about the players. But in Japan, and also in America, each kind of announcer has their own different feel. But in Japan, they stick more to the flow of the game, and actually most of the announcers kind of sound very similar, and they all kind of call games in a similar way, and you can kind of anticipate what's coming just by the way that they call the game. So that's interesting, but of course Japan places much less emphasis on competitiveness or my team's the best and your team is, we don't like your team, we're rivals, like this. There's so many rivalries that they talk about in America. You don't really, I mean, of course there are teams that have a history here in Japan, but you never have that sense, and definitely not between the fans. And when I talk even with Sean, and sometimes I think, yeah, that's what an American is like, he likes to rag on me about my teams. He likes to, tell me, especially when they lose, and things like that. And I think, really, is it so important? And one time I said, could you just send me a message when you have good news for once? But that's the American sports kind of feeling, the culture there. They like rivalries. They like to rag on each other. They like to do that. And I think in a bigger picture, kind of thinking about our Hiroshima episode, maybe you get a sense of how Japan really values peace so much. And then it's, of course, born from the feeling of everyone being aware of their neighbors. Talked about that theme before too, and being conscientious of one another, everyone living together in this small place. Maybe multiple generations living in the same home, and trying to maintain peace so that everyone can feel a sense of harmony, and also have their own sense of solitude at times, even in this crowded area. And then, of course, from the war, and from Hiroshima and the Peace Memorial, and peace being such a central part of the Japanese culture, and the Japanese populace, everyone, fighting, striving so vehemently, so earnestly to make sure that the government doesn't change the clause in the law that says that they can have a standing army. That people wanting the government just to maintain at the very most a self-defense force, and to maintain its pacifist stance, which was not something that this is something that the U.S. government written into Japan's constitution. But over the history and throughout the culture, they really find that as a something that defines who they are. And for sure, that sense of peace and living together peacefully, and accepting one another, and projecting peace and harmony toward one another is just so important in Japan, and that's really something that I really appreciate, and something that I notice is not the same when I come back to America.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing that, Barney. That's really inspiring to me, and your story of how you've plugged in and learned and grown to love life there in Japan, and to start a family in Japan and be continually engaged in what you're doing there and teaching is beautiful and inspiring to me. Thank you so much for sharing that today.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure our listeners learned some new things. I know I learned a lot of new things in your story today too. So thank you so much. We really appreciate it. And maybe I'll turn it over to you just to close our time.
Yeah, I would, of course, like to thank all of you out there listening for sticking with us today. And of course, thank you so much to Jacob for being such a great and amazing listener, and asking such wonderful questions to, help me think more about my life here in Japan and my journey here. And of course, thank you to Ken for kind of touching on this topic as something that might make a good episode as well. And I hope all of you out there will think about the way you relate to one another and the way you relate to other cultures, and take my advice not to be scared to try new foods. You might not have the chance to try it again. You might find something that you really love. And think about ways to experience other cultures in other ways through books and movies and friendships, and we always appreciate you listening together with us. And we look forward to the next episode and hope that you do too. Goodbye.